Hello everyone. Before I proceed to the next topic, I wanted to introduce you to various file formats that are used in big data ecosystem. This is going to be our agenda. We'll take a look at Parquet, Avro, CSV and JSON file format. But before talking about various file formats, we need to understand what is a file format. What file format does, it essentially encodes stream of data into a particular format using encoding. So what is encoding? Encoding is essentially putting a sequence of characters in specialized format. That's what encoding is. So let's say you are writing data in your Word document or Excel sheet, etc. When those data are saved in the disk, those are saved in binary format. So that is also a type of encoding. You take a piece of data and convert it to a different format which can be stored in the underlying storage. So this is a better definition, I feel. Encoding is nothing but converting data into a different format. So now after defining encoding, let's see what a file format is. So definition of file format is how records are encoded in a particular file. That means if you write data to a particular file, how those data would be encoded in the underlying storage. We have different types of file formats like Parquet, CSV, JSON, Avro, ORC. These different file formats take data and put it encoded before storing in the storage system. So for example, let's say I want to store the word Hadoop in my file system or in my storage system. So if you are using Parquet, then maybe the encoding is as such that it will convert Hadoop, which looks like this in the storage. Again, this is just an example. Don't take it literally. This is not how a word is stored in Parquet. Definitely not. It is just to show you an example. Now, if you store the same Hadoop word in Avro format, maybe it is encoded like this before storing in the storage system or hard disk. Same is the case with CSV. If you take Hadoop, maybe it is written directly as Hadoop or it is encoded in a different format. So that's what file format is, or various types of file formats are. You take the records, encode them and put them in a file. Now, different types of file formats use different types of encoding. So let's talk about Parquet. Parquet is a columnar storage, and what it does is it chunks a file into something called row groups, and column of those row groups are stored together. So that's why it is columnar storage. In a particular block, let's say in a storage block, you'll have value for only one column. So it is stored column wise rather than row wise. So let's say you have 1,000 rows and you split them into 250 rows each. So you'll have four chunks. These chunks are called row groups. As I said, columns of row groups are stored together in pages or blocks. So if I talk about one of the 250 row groups, let's say we have 250 rows in one row group. So column 1 would be stored for row 1 to row 250 together. Column 2, 3 and 4 for row number 1 to row number 250 would be stored in this row group. So if you see in Parquet, the columns are stored together for a particular number of rows. Now there's an advantage here. For each column, Parquet also maintains the metadata, meaning metadata of minimum value and maximum value, meaning what is the minimum value of column 1 that is stored in this particular block or page, and what is the maximum value of column 1 that is stored in this particular page or block. Same is the case with column 2, column 3 and column 4. So if you use a Parquet file in queries, the filtering becomes very easier because you do not have to scan the entire row group or the entire file. There's one more additional feature in Parquet is that the schema is stored along with the data. So whenever you store your data in Parquet format, you have to mention a schema while writing, and that schema would also be stored along with the file. So obviously there are SDKs available which you typically use to write schema and store Parquet files. The next one is Avro. Avro is not column oriented, it is row oriented file format, meaning that all columns of row 1 would be stored together, all columns of row 2 would be stored together. So basically all columns of a particular row would be stored together in one or more blocks or pages. As it is row oriented file format, it is suitable for OLTP workloads or online transaction processing. Data is stored in contiguous blocks So rows are stored in contiguous blocks one after the other. Single row number 1 would be stored first, then row number 2, row number 3, and so on. Records can be encoded using two formats. One is binary and the other one is JSON. So while storing records in Avro file format, the encoding can be either binary or JSON. Again, you do not have to do the encoding. The SDKs will take care of it. When you use an SDK to write your records in Avro file format, the SDK will do the encoding automatically rather than you. So the drivers or the SDKs have all these built-in features. Schema is stored along with data in Avro also. So let's say you have 1000 rows. All these 1000 rows would be stored one after the other, block by block. This is a typical page. You have a header of your page, then you have block number 1, block number 2, 3, 4, and so on. So let's say block 1 contains row number 1 and then row number 2, row number 3. Then block 2 would contain row number 4 onwards. So all the rows are contiguously stored in contiguous blocks. So there's no separation of columns in Avro file format. Individual blocks are also divided into multiple record types. At the beginning, it will contain a metadata like the number of records in this particular block. Then it will contain the total size of records in the block. And then it will contain the actual data. So let's say you have each record size is, let's say, 10 kilobytes, for example. And let's say there are 50 records. So this initial few bytes would contain the number 50. After that, it will contain, this block would contain 500 KB and then the actual data. So this is how Avro stores records in this format. The next one is ORC, or optimized row columnar. It is similar to Parquet more or less. It is also column oriented file format, and rows are grouped into groups which are called stripes. In case of Parquet, it was row groups. Columns of stripes are stored together. So for all the rows, meaning that let's say a single stripe contains 10 rows and each row contains, let's say, 10 columns. Column number 1 for row number 1 to 10 would be stored together. Column number 2 for row number 1 to 10 would be stored together. So just like Parquet. There's a metadata block which is called index data. So it contains metadata like minimum value and maximum value for each column. It also contains the row positions within each column. Stripe footer contains the location of each data, meaning it contains pointers to each of the data location. So let's say you have 1000 rows. You divide it into 4 groups. I have shown only 2 here, 250 rows and 250 rows. So these smaller chunks are called stripes. A stripe would contain the index data, which contains the metadata, and then the row data. So let's say you have 10 rows in this particular stripe and it has 6 columns. Column 1 for row number 1 to 10 would be stored together. Column number 2 for row number 1 to 10 would be stored together, and so on. Finally, it has stripe footer, which contains the location of each data in this particular stripe. A single stripe is of size 250 MB in ORC file format. Now there are some other formats also like CSV and JSON. I'll not talk about CSV and JSON, these are pretty straightforward. One more thing you want to realize that you can convert one file format to other file format using programming languages like Python. So let's say you have Parquet, you want to convert it to Avro, you can do that. Let's say you have CSV or JSON, you want to convert it to Parquet, you can do that as well. So that's all I wanted to talk about the various file formats. Thank you. See you in the next video.